My name is Ken Field, and I am the moderator for this conversation about the Second Line Social Aid and Pleasure Society
Brass band.
And we're just going to talk about what the band is all about, how the band was formed, why the band was formed, and what the band means to us as individuals. Let's start with John Bell. John Bell, do you want to say a few things, since you're an old timer? You've been around since the band started.
Well, my name is John Bell. I'm a puppeteer and a professor. And I was talking with my wife, Trudy, and in 2003, there were a lot of demonstrations in Boston against the Iraq War. And some of us, including Maury Martin and Bob Follansbee and Mary Curtin and Don Stevenson, and Trudy and myself, found ourselves sort of being in an ad hoc brass band playing around in marches around Boston Common. And after one of those demonstrations, we sort of looked at each other and said, oh, why don't we keep playing? We already had an interest in New Orleans music, and I think the idea of the social aid and pleasure clubs as a traditional, really African-American way of doing activist community music struck us as a model, and we were playing and are playing a lot of New Orleans style music. And then Second Line is another actually kind of contradictory idea of how community people join in a brass band. So that's how, in a nutshell, how we started. After a few years of playing, we noticed that there were other brass bands in New York City, for example. The Rude Mechanical Orchestra had grown out of Hungry March Band to be a specifically activist group. And so we knew about them. We knew about the Brass Liberation Orchestra in San Francisco. We knew about, I think, Environmental Encroachment in Chicago. We knew about the Carnival Band in Vancouver. And so we said, oh, maybe there could be a coming together of these groups. And I think at least for Trudy and myself, we had the experience of helping organize sort of DIY theater festivals with Bread and Puppet Theater in Vermont. So we thought, oh, it's possible to do a DIY festival, pretty straightforward. We can all do that, and so we did in 2006.
Thanks, John. That's a really good rundown. Sammo, you've been in the band for a shorter time than John, and what's your take on how the band's role as an activist street band, I don't know, matches your own desire to have some activism and combine it with your music?
Thanks, Ken. That's a really good question. Yeah, my name is Sammo Gabay, and I play saxophone, and I try to squeak out some trumpet occasionally in the Second Line band. I know for me personally, I was probably one of those who, in 2008, with the election of President Obama, felt that somehow as an American society, we had made it. Then in 2016, it was revealed that that was not very true at all. I'd been in the band before that, but that really started to sort of awaken the desire to me to really look at what are sort of the injustices we see in society. The two things that I say are the most important to me are sort of racial and justice, which includes housing justice, food justice, and climate change. And those two issues are very, very linked. Those are two of the big thrusts that we care about and participate with activist organizations that are aligned. So I really appreciate the work that we do, for example, with Extinction Rebellion and joining them on their actions throughout downtown Boston. And I think another thing that I like about Second Line is that I've gotten the sense that, you know, after this sort of COVID time alleviates a little bit, we realize that there's still a lot of work to do and that we're going to get down and get our feet dirty again.
Great. Yeah, we're ready to get our feet and also our fingers dirty. Reebee, continuing on the activist theme, on the activism theme, you have a long history of activism. In fact, I know you from way back in the 80s or 90s when you were involved with Rock Against Racism. And so it's been, quite a pleasure to play with you now in this band and work with you on the Honk Festival. You have a long perspective on activism. What's your thinking about how we fit into the activist culture in Boston, in the Boston area and beyond?
My mother's whole side of the family were professional musicians, so I've had music in my life since the womb. My mother had an all-girl jazz band in the 1930s. I became politicized during the early civil rights movement, and for me, because of the way the civil rights movement was structured, the notion of building a mass movement powered by music has been the goal of my life ever since. The moment I saw the first poster for the first Honk Festival, I was like, okay, I got to join that thing. I joined the committee immediately after the first festival. Been doing this for now, 15 years. Very soon after that, there was an opening in the band for a drummer, so I joined the band. I'm now one of the snare drummers in the band. Adding music to a demonstration really just kicks the energy up a notch. It provides people with a sense of joy and celebration during periods that are real struggles. When I was doing civil rights work in Mississippi, there was no underestimating the power of music and the value it had in getting people through the day and energizing people and moving them to do more things than they felt possible. The more we keep doing this, the more we become more sophisticated in terms of how to use music as a tool for activism. And so it's not simply, bands providing the entertainment for a demonstration. It's now we are fully integrated into the politics of the demonstrations that we play at. The performance of politics becomes a seamless thing between the groups organizing protests and the groups playing the music for them.
Thanks, Reebee. Your deep insight is really valuable, both now and also to the band as a whole and to the Honk movement. I have a question for you, Stephanie. If you could introduce yourself, but also we've been talking a lot about how the band influences the community, but the band also has an impact on the members of the band internally. And I'm curious what your perspective is on what the band brings to you personally.
Thanks, Ken. My name is Stephanie. Pronouns are she, hers, and I play tenor saxophone in second line. I've been in second line for 3 years now. And the band itself brings so much to each of us personally. And I would say ever since I joined, it has been a central part of my life, my social group, and it feels like a family. I actually recently moved out of state, so I can't be with the band physically and play with them, but I still feel very much like an active member of the band. Two of my favorite things about the band that I think have brought a lot of personal growth. One is that it's such an intergenerational band, and so our youngest members of the band are in their early 20s, and our oldest members of the band are in their 70s, and we can all be friends with each other. I'm friends with people who have 40 more years of life experience than I do, and that just means so much to me. And we all bring our differing experiences to the band, and sometimes we have different opinions, and we talk about them, and we learn from each other. And it's really important to me that my friend group doesn't consist of all people who look exactly like me and have the same background and demographics that I do. So that's been really meaningful. The other thing I really like about the band is that there's no one leader of the band. And so it doesn't mean we're a leaderless band. Everyone steps up and leads at some point. So I guess you could say we're a 30-member band, and so we have 30 leaders of the band. We have tons of different roles that need to be filled in. People do really step up, and we make all of our decisions by consensus. It does lead to conflict sometimes, and we disagree sometimes, but for me that has been really valuable in learning how to talk through disagreements and hear each other and know when it's time to say something and know when it's time to step back and and go with a decision that you don't completely agree with. So that has been a really huge area of growth for me. And I love that we're always still figuring it out. We're always making changes and talking about how we should make our decisions and trying to do things better and keep making sure everyone is heard.
Wow, that was really a great rundown. I mean, everything you said, Stephanie, really resonates. Reebee, did you want to say something about age diversity in the band?
As the oldest band member currently, the intergenerational aspect of the band is something that's particularly important to me, because I remember when I first joined the band, it's like there was about, maybe 12 or 13 of us, and 3/4 of us were over 50. And like, I think the youngest person in the band was in her late 30s or something. And I thought, oh my God, what's going to happen when we get too old to play? And then along came Occupy, and we started playing for the Occupy demonstrations. And lo and behold, every now and then you'd see a 20-year-old trumpet player come out of his tent with a trumpet and join the band. And that really caught fire. And since that moment, the band has become fully intergenerational. And in a personal way, being able to have people in their 20s that I can consider peers and relate to as peers is something I absolutely cherish. And it's also, I mean, in a larger political sense, it means there's a whole other generation to carry on this work when I can't do it anymore. I love that.
Reebee, you mentioned Occupy. John, do you have some other thoughts about our involvement with activist organizations and activism in general?
Well, I was thinking about something Steph was saying a few minutes ago about how we organize ourselves as a band. Steph was saying, we don't actually have one leader, we take turns. I think in terms of the way we approach the questions that face us, we're always trying to think about how what we do connects us to the community or communities in which we play, and also how we connect to each other. Sometimes it's complicated, but usually it's super interesting, because it's all about trying to figure out what we're doing in, like, now the year 2020, and how we can relate to each other, and how we as a group relate to the towns in which we live, the national political issues and international issues, and then specific things about how we perform in a demonstration with, a union or an activist group, that liaison. All of those things I think are really super fascinating and exciting to think about. It's always enlightening for me when we figure these things out. So I think that's a real benefit and value of our nature as an activist band.
So a couple more things, and then I think we'll wrap up. Sammo, you had a question that I think you wanted to pose to Reebee. Do you want to just do that yourself?
Reebee, one of the things you mentioned is that you were very active in what we might call the first civil rights era. I think we're perhaps seeing ourselves flourish into a new one. I was wondering if you could sort of compare what you see now to what you saw then, and where does Second Line sort of fit in this moment?
Quite a question, trying to figure out where Second Line fits in. I lived through a transition in the early civil rights movement. When I first got involved in the civil rights movement, it was a very, what I would call, integrationist strategy of trying to gain social acceptance for Black folks. And at the time, there was this notion that it's black and white together, there's no differences between us, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Which in some ways was based on, I thought, a denial of real differences. I got beat up on the lawn of the courthouse in Mississippi and realized that the terror that I experienced for 5 minutes characterized the entire lives of many of the people that I was working alongside of. So when that movement transitioned into the Black Power movement, it felt to me like sort of the logical evolution of where the movement had to go. The movement had to go to a place that recognized Black leadership and recognized the need for Black self-determination. And I think that's very similar to a moment we're in right now. And the thing that I find very hopeful is that we have white allies and white accomplices lifting up Black leadership and willing to take direction from Black leaders, turning out to support demonstrations by the thousand. This is a moment that has given me more hope than at any time since the civil rights movement. At the same time, this is a movement that has produced fear in equal measure, because it's not just progressive white allies and Black folks who have been living with this stuff all their lives turning out for these protests. It's also forces from the right who are trying to turn back the clock to way before the early civil rights movement. The fact that they are in alliance with the powers that are in positions to run a good bit of the country is scary. So I think we're at a moment where some very dramatic structural change is going to come to the United States, and I hope that the progressive forces that we're all allied with manage to prevail in that struggle. Let's make it happen.
So I'd like to transition a little bit to the Honk Festival and the relationship between the Second Line Band and the Honk Festival. And this year, of course, we're not going to have a normal in-person Honk Festival. We're participating right now in Honk United, which will be an online effort to bring together the worldwide Honk community. Is there something you want to say about the festival and how it relates to the band and how it relates to you personally?
The Honk Festival is the reason that I joined the band in the first place. About 5 years ago, a friend of mine took me to the Honk Festival for the first time, and I saw Second Line perform for the first time, and I immediately thought, wow, I have to join that band. And funnily enough, I saw the band performing and everyone was dressed wildly in black and red costuming. And I thought to myself, oh no, I'm not weird enough for this band. But I joined the band, I was accepted. And the Honk festivals, it's not a big number of the gigs that we do, but it's something that we so look forward to every year, whether it's our local honk or whether we're traveling somewhere else to go visit somebody else's city for a honk. It brings so many different people together from all over the world, really. And we all get to meet each other and have fun and play music together for a whole weekend. And it's really incredible and magical. When I tell people about Honk, those local people who have heard of it around Somerville, Cambridge, Boston say, oh my gosh, yeah, I love Honk, it's amazing. And those who have never heard of it say, wow, that sounds amazing. It's focused on community and it's free for people to go and it's outdoors and there's music and there's families there and people dress in costumes that they want to dress in or clothing that it seems like people feel more free to express themselves at the Honk Festival, and that's something that is really valuable about it.
You know, I think we're all, you included, a bunch of weirdos, so nobody's excluded. Reebee has something important he'd like to say, and then I'm going to give Sammo the last word.
I just wanted to mention that the expansion of the Honk Festival, we were faced early on with, this thing was becoming more and more successful and actually could have been a victim of its own success. But instead, we thought about the way this thing should expand and grow is that we should encourage other people in other places to do Honk festivals of their own. There's now 22 Honk festivals around the world. that are participating in the event that this interview will air on. And it's really quite amazing that we can mobilize that kind of a community across the globe.
It is amazing, and in some ways, it just has taken on a life of its own, and people,
Yeah.
just gone on and done that. Well, thanks very much. I'm just going to give Sammo the last word, and then we can all unmute and do our brass band thing again.
Thanks, Ken. Well, I mean, I guess I'll just say I really appreciated the ability to be here with all of my friends from the band. You know, it's been really hard because we haven't been able to see each other. I really just looking forward to seeing where we're going to go in the future. I do hope that we can continue to think about how we encourage more inclusivity and diversity in our own membership. I know that's something we think about. I think we're on the right path. And yeah, I just look forward to 2021.
I think we've covered a lot of territory, and it you know, reminds me of all the great reasons why I'm a member of the band and why I appreciate what we do. Just happy to be with all of you, and we are members of the Second Line Social Aid and Pleasure Society.
Brass
Band.
And
Thank you all.